What do we think, Justin?
Oh, I can't get Tucker Rose out of my mind. I can't figure out whether it's better to call him Tucker Rose or Tokyo Carlson. I don't know what rings better.
I think Tucker Rose is better. Kind of sounds like a stripper name, though, to be honest. You
Well,
know,
he does that role too, I think, in some ways.
what a sad state of affairs. You know,
Yeah, I mean, he's gone full. You know, I remember this is broad strokes about prior to World War II, there was a lot of discussion and argument about whether to get into and even what side of World War II, right? I mean, there was discussion and fights and all that. But this is something completely different. He's actively taking the side of the state enemy and is I don't know how to describe it. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Worse, it's like worse. Just one piece of just background. I lived in Cincinnati when Pete Rose, uh, bet on baseball. Now, some people argue whether he bet on his own side. Well, that's fine, but he still bet on baseball, and baseball was never the same for me after that, or anybody else. I think, among all of us buddies, and seeing like Tucker go down that road is kind of the same. I mean, maybe he was never on like you
no,
know.
I knew him. I mean, I can tell you that the Tucker that I knew and first met in 2011, 2012, is just not the same dude. Like, I don't know what to say about it. You know,
So
like,
they did a number on it. They did something awful to him.
something's going on there. I don't know what it is, but I can just tell you, like, he would make fun of people that were skeptical of Putin, but he would also make fun of Putin. He was sort of like irreverent and whatever about it. But this is, aid and comfort to the enemy. And I think a lot of it has to do with the relationship he had with, with Arthur Schwartz, with sort of other players, where he wants to be, he wanted to be a kingmaker, and he wanted Thomas Massey on the weaponization of government group. And he was just trying to play all these games from his position at Fox News. And it's all kind of really sad in a way, you know?
Yeah, it looks like it's all crumbling down now. So that's it for him.
Does it feel to you like it does to me that, like, there's a whole lot of Gen Xers that are basically being, like, put into forced retirement lately? Like, whether it's in tech or in finance or what have you? Kind of feels that way. Like, there's a whole bunch of people that just kind of hit a wall in their careers in their early 50s, right? Like, Chuck Todd is now gone. Certainly in the media landscape, things are changing a lot. I don't know. It just seems very interesting on some level.
Well, now here's the thing: is when they're gone, there won't be much difference. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have much productive capacity to begin with. So what were they doing? Maybe things will be better now that they're gone. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of people out there where it just seems to me that they're just not playing the game at a high level. That's my sense of it anyway.
This would be like for the NFL when the NFL had, replacement players. Grappler football is having to get replacement players, or they're playing at that level, and it's it's a shit show, isn't it?
I don't know. It's really depressing though, seeing somebody that was a friend of yours that you liked, that you had dinner with and hung out with. It's really depressing watching Tucker's show now. Like watching it on Twitter. It's wow, how the mighty have fallen. You know.
Yeah, and the acronym is TOT, which I just can't get over too. Who calls themselves TOT? Tucker on Twitter, I think it's called.
It's just weird. I think there was all sorts of signs here. Like the weird relationship with his Indian friend or whatever, Neil Patel, when they started the Daily Caller. The relationship with who was that guy from Wyoming who was the money behind it, Foster Freeze. And I just think Tucker is kind of just a fake bullshitter type. It's kind of, it's just sad. It really is. I'm in Houston walking around and having a good time and avoiding all the crazy smoke inhalation of Quebec, from Quebec going into New York and all that. And I got to say, I don't know, there's something about when you travel within the country, you kind of, and meet like all kinds of different people, you kind of realize like how small a lot of the cable news personalities are. And they sort of dominate a narrow slice of the conversation, but it's a diminishing one. And I think in general, the problem is cable news on the whole is just bad for people. You know, it doesn't quite work. And I was thinking about this earlier in the context of like, what is that? The Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, right? So today, we saw Governor Chris Christie go to New Hampshire and basically spend 2 hours chatting with a bunch of strangers, right? They didn't pre-screen the questions. They didn't, he just let people come at him. And he did pretty well. He had a sort of level of confidence and a level of competence that I don't think we've seen from a political leader in a long time. And, you think about Trump, what was Trump doing throughout the presidential campaign in 2016? He was phoning in to like not to Tucker Carlson, but to Sean Hannity. He was calling all these people. And he was sort of like in a very broadcast medium, big stadium approach. But I think people are kind of sick of that shit. And they kind of like these types of spaces. They like mixing it up with people, chatting with them on kind of equal footing. And I think that that's really where things are going. It's kind of my sense of it. So I thought he did pretty well. I don't know. What did you think? I think you watched it, right, Tom?
No, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I'm at a thing in Ojai, California, so I'm gonna have to jump off here shortly. But no, I look forward when I get back to watching it and then seeing what happens.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was the old Chris Christie, like doing the town halls, like he did during his governorship. It's interesting.
I had gone back and watched a couple of his older ones, and he was really, really good. I mean, the guy, he's so light on his feet, which is really amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's like watching some kind of ballet or something. It's weird.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
He's got, he's amazing. He really is. And then that big fat man energy, there's nothing like it.
It was interesting how he criticized Biden too, because he seemed to like never really come at him, which I found interesting. Almost like they had some kind of deal or something.
Because Biden will get on there and say, "Listen, pal, let's do push-ups."
Well,
Christie doesn't want to go there.
Yeah, I think my read on it is that Christie is the deep state candidate of this cycle. My sort of read on it is that he's going to force Donald Trump off the stage. And then once Donald Trump is sort of off the stage after the indictments and everything, then it'll be him versus DeSantis. And I think the DeSantis money issues, particularly around the pension and all of the weird donations he was getting, that's going to be the thing that sort of slows DeSantis. That's kind of my read on it, for what it's worth. So the deep state will own both sides of the trade. They'll own Joe Biden and they'll own Chris Christie. That's kind of my optimistic scenario going into 2024.
Yeah, Christie, in hockey, they would call Chris Christie's that role is the enforcer, right? So he's going after anybody who's taking on the top talent. It doesn't matter whether he wins or not, but he's going to go and take out DeSantis and the other guy.
Yeah, it was interesting. He actually made a lot of historical arguments today, and he made a lot of reference to an American story. It was interesting. It was like a level of attention to detail that I haven't seen from a politician in a long time. I went in, not really knowing what to expect, but kind of came away with the view that I think he's got it. And you saw Sununu is not running, Larry Hogan is not running, so there's sort of this like Northeast kind of establishment view, and he's sort of going to like try and take that lane, which will be interesting. My sense is that it's going to be very hard to see Chris Christie winning the redneck base of the Republican Party, so long as Trump is in the race. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I know John was talking a little bit about the Saudi deal today on the Gulf matter, which looks to me like the whole Saudi Gulf thing seems to be a way in which Donald Trump can be paid by the Saudis. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, John? I know you've been tweeting about it.
Yeah, I don't really have a take on it other than I think it's, eerily timed with the SEC coming after Coinbase. And I'm wondering if it's more about a money transfer opportunity or, a window closing on a money transfer opportunity more than anything.
Yeah, that feels correct, doesn't it? That basically feels directionally right. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about this as I think about it as I'm kind of walking around here in lovely Sugarland, Texas. It seems to me that there's all sorts of ways in which money is moved through these deals, and basically when we have an FTC that is actually doing its job, a lot of these things get shut down in their various ways. So I think we're going to see that this deal is sort of not approved. Right, it doesn't get done. And it's not lost on me that the Saudi Gulf deal, which Trump said basically would get approved, right, that they would basically be able to merge together, it's not lost on me that such a thing is taking place right on the eve of Trump potentially being indicted over the whole documents issue. Right, there's clearly some more weird stuff going on there than meets the eye. Like, these two things are linked somehow. But anywho. Did anyone else watch the Christie speech? Don't all speak at once. Maybe this is why he's not going to do well, is that nobody else watched it. Yeah, Michael down there has seen it. I'll invite Michael up. Michael's, of course, always messaging me things, like 70% of which I read, but he sends me a lot of stuff.
Charles, real quick before we go back on to Chris Christie, I just threw up a link in the Jumbotron case out of the Eastern District of New York today, going after an organization I had never even heard of called One Taste, but it sounds very, very kind of NXIVM cult-like. So there's a link to the DOJ press release up in the Jumbotron. Check it out. Seems kind of interesting.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
I think foreign hostile intelligence operations are coming to a close in a lot of places. Or at least it looks that way on a lot of fronts.
It certainly feels like a lot of the cults are being shut down in all these weird ways, and that many of these kind of cults have these foreign intelligence ties, and obviously business ties because they effectively have slave labor. But it is interesting to kind of watch, see it shake out. What's your sense, Carrie? Did you watch this? Oh, I see you also put up the stuff about Jacob Wall and John Berkman and all of that. By the way, I've met both of those guys. They clearly are some kind of weird Israeli intelligence operation. I don't know kind of what to say beyond that, you know. There's a photo around of me, Ali Alexander, and Jacob Wall. And all these people are like, oh, you know, they're in league together. And it's like, no, you dumb fucks. Like, how do you think you catch an Ali Alexander or a Jacob Wall misbehaving? Like, do you think these things just like happen naturally? It's like you have to go meet them to talk to them and see what's going on first. Anyway, it's distressing. But yeah, the Jacob Wall thing I thought was good news. I really don't understand why they're out and about on the street or whatever. It's somewhat confusing to me. Um, and then I do think, that Merck lawsuit was really kind of strange
Can
and
I just
disturbing.
say how rich it is that Merck is claiming that the government is doing extortion on them after they're charging 34 times the price in the United States as what they charged in the EU?
Yeah, it is pretty insane, isn't it? I mean, I saw the price differential was, to me, just totally crazy and insane. But that is kind of how we are in this country, I guess. I don't know. We put up with this stuff in a lot of ways. I find it very dispiriting. We don't really have to live like this, and yet we choose to somehow.
I think there's just a tremendous lack of awareness, or I guess maybe a lack of discrete awareness. I think people feel it even if they can't necessarily see who's doing it. But I think if we start putting names with faces and maybe putting a few racketeering lawsuits and prosecutions together, then we'll see what happens. I'm bullish on that front. We'll see.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, it is kind of. I think people could be like 5 times, 10 times, maybe. But when you look, it's like 34 times or 70 times for this drug or that drug. It really reaches a point where you're like, okay, you know,
Well,
that's a bit much.
there's that episode of Dirty Money on Netflix about Valiant and Bill Ackman and that whole scheme. But it seems like that industry was really big into mergers and acquisitions for a while at the cost of true R&D, and so it seemed like the whole pricing model was take a drug that actually has a market share and jack the price by several orders of magnitude if you can, and it's talk about extortion. It's like, hey, this may be the only drug your rare condition on the market. Pay this price or you die. That's literally extortion.
Yeah, it is amazing to me that Americans put up with it. Like people, the fact that people aren't like protesting and like going crazy at major hospitals. I guess because the drugs are so rare. Maybe that's why. I don't know, or the diseases are so rare, but it is strange.
I do think it's interesting that among, and I don't know the specifics because it's now many years ago, but 2005, 2006, during George W.'s second term, there was that big bankruptcy reform. And among the things that at that time had been dischargeable in bankruptcy was a lot of health care debt. And that was taken away. So I don't think that's an accident.
Yeah, my sense on it is that there's this there's a lot of drug dealers that basically tried to go legit through modern pharmaceutical world, and that a lot of those giant fortunes that took place through the opioid scandal or what have you, that those kind of scandals kind of continue to this very day. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it seems to me like having met some of the pharmaceutical people over the years, like these are like drug dealers. Like they may be like in like wearing the right white collar or whatever, but they have the same kind of drug dealer feel to them that you encounter with other people. So I don't know. It does strike me as kind of something. I thought Christie was pretty weak tonight on it. Um, that was pretty telling to me that he wasn't very strong on the drug dealer kind of question about pharmaceuticals. He's like, oh, well, they need to be working on investing in the next life-saving drugs. And it's like, you and I know, John, that they don't invest the money in life-saving drugs anymore. Like, that's not a thing that they do.
No, the whole model is, to program your brain into being chronically ill for the first 20 years of your life and then profit off of all of the times you're going to drain down the healthcare system until you die. And it's a pretty grim outlook, but it's the only way that, when it's 15% of the economy and the economy is expected to grow at a certain percent per year, do the math and you go, well, the perverse incentive structures are there, whether we want them to be or not.
Yeah, I do think maybe there's a future in which a Christie presidency could be a kind of Nixon going to China thing for the health issues that we face in the country, right? Like having a big old fat guy actually be good on health issues would be quite interesting and useful. I don't know.
Richard's here.
But
Let's see if did Richard check? Did Richard watch the
yeah, did you
the
watch
Christie
the
announcement?
Christie announcement?
I saw some highlights, so I probably watched about 15 minutes of it or so. I didn't think it was so weak. I thought it was pretty good, actually. And I
The whole
liked.
thing was very, very good, but there were specific parts that I was complaining about.
Oh, there are specific parts. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought the. Oh, hold on. My dog is getting away. Zeus, come here. Good boy. Sit.
Of course, your dog would be named
If
Zeus.
Chris Christie
Well, yeah.
could have got on a boogie board and announced his presidential campaign, we'd all be for it. Like him on the Jersey Shore, riding a good wave on that boogie board. It'd be great. I guess that's just me.
Yeah, you said that as if like getting, it was almost like you could elect a ham sandwich or something.
No, I'm thinking that if he could catch a good wave
yeah,
with a nice
no, that
break,
would be amazing.
and he could be like,
Yeah.
I'm running for president as he's holding a Bud Light in his left hand. But, he's a good guy.
Yeah, he went after Trump a little bit, kind of in a personal way that might appeal to liberals, I guess, when he was like, Trump makes it about himself and things like that, and I guess that's okay. But I'm ready for like him, if he's going to do this and it's going to be interesting, I'm ready for some red meat to sink my teeth into.
Can
did a
you
lot
really
on it.
trust somebody who has like 7 letters distributed through their first and last name? You can't trust somebody like that. You have to have more letters in your name.
Oh, I see. Yeah, Christie. Yeah, it is
quite repetitive.
Well,
I was impressed. That's all I really got to say about the.
Yeah, you watched the whole thing, right, Michael?
I didn't watch the entire. I didn't watch him like it looked like he was like talking to voters like at the end or something like that. But I watched like the whole spiel, and it's really interesting that the only thing they're really taking from it is that he mentioned Woodrow Wilson, and that's why they're attacking him, and it's really interesting.
How? In what context did he mention Wilson?
He said that it's like he said like statesman or something like that. Like I can't remember. Like people like he talked about just like principled politicians and stuff. Like I don't know, something along those lines.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson was good actually. I've become a Wilson revisionist.
What? Get out of here!
I mean, no. I'm not surprised that. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean,
agree that they hate someone. That's when I'm like, I need to take a second look at this guy.
No, but he's like Ku Klux Klan, World War I, Zionist influence. It's just not good.
FDR married his cousin, and she's got a national park outside of Washington. It's a crazy world we live in.
I'm a supporter of the progressive era that he.
Well, not marrying your cousin.
Oh no! I'm talking about Wilson.
Oh, I was talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who
he's also good.
But he married his cousin.
Yeah, I don't really have issues with people marrying their cousins.
that is the optimal.
That's crazy.
Optimal to marry
we look over that.
Cousin.
Her name is Eleanor.
No, it's not no.
And his name was Franklin Delano. They're cousins. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's not. It's
but think
not
about
as
it this
bad
way:
as the stereotype is. There's. I mean, second cousin. I just beyond that, it's fine.
I removed PSAT because it was talking over people.
And
Also, like consanguinity, it's not a big deal if you come from higher genetic stock. Just to be clear about it. So
it's not a big deal.
I was about to set my watch by when Charles was going to mention.
We're all our ancestors married cousins and stuff like that. It's I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's incest taboos for a reason. I mean, yes, major problems can come out of siblings, etc. But cousins, it's just not a huge deal. I mean, again, I haven't done it. Most people don't do it, but it just to like say that that's inherently evil or something is just wrong. It's not.
It was hilarious. Dr. Oz said that like it was acceptable with the second cousin, like when he was campaigning for public office, and I'm like, oh my god, like what are you doing? It's just amazing. Sorry, I just want to say for Wilson, it's weird because I support the income tax, the 16th Amendment. I think the 19th Amendment was also signed under him. I support that, but also he like resegregated the government, like
Yeah,
the workforce or whatever.
that was terrible.
And he really did let in the Parushim, the secret Zionist society, Felix Frankfurter, Simon Wolf, like the real early sort of
I mean,
penetration
we
of the
ultimately
Zionists.
need a central bank. I mean, this, I don't know, this just strikes me as kind of like right ring crankery. He had good taste in movies.
Oh,
He had what? It says a lot about people.
but Richard,
He
I understand the progressive era, but I feel like he was the beginning.
progressive era was overall awesome. Secondly, he whatever you want to say about him, he wasn't intellectual in politics. He actually did offer a vision going forward, a competing vision to Bolshevism. Now, there are some problems with it, but he was able to basically in Paris in 1919 create a kind of notion of a world order with America at its center. So, I mean, he is who he is. I'm not saying I'm fully in love with him or something like that. I just, whenever like all these conservatives get, they all kind of get into a consensus about something, that's usually a sign that they're all wrong, or at the very least that there's something major being overlooked. And of all the things, I mean, these conservatives going after the progressive era, I mean, they're talking about like, I don't know, national parks, like an efficient government,
They go back to
uh,
having sawdust in
contraception
and sulfate
rights,
in your
like
green beans.
they're talking about these things from some kind of reactionary Catholic perspective or something. I mean, it's called just having a modern government that works and that does actually some really good things, in fact.
But it was all wrapped up.
I mean,
I think that the progressive part of the era that Wilson started was too mixed up in like technocracy. He helped start the city manager system. I just put the Lawrence City Commission here onto this article because we're celebrating Juneteenth for the month. But from the Maynard.com, 99 years, the racist roots and results of the city manager system of government. And I really think this was this was the shadow side of the progressive era.
well, I know you like Wilson, but do you have any criticisms?
Maybe I'll look at it again, but I don't like to do reactionary epistemology. I agree with you that if everybody's sort of saying someone is bad of a specific set, then maybe you should go look at them again. But the fact is, it
Yeah.
may often when a whole group of people say someone is bad, they're even worse than what they say, and they're actually covering up how bad it really was.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that could happen. Have you noticed that like all of these objectively bad presidents, with the exception of Trump, are kind of like looked on fondly by the mainstream media and even mainstream historians? Like George W. Bush is kind of, like, well, at least he didn't do J6 or something, like by
I mean,
liberal
they
historians.
just say what he did in Africa, like PEP, whatever the fuck that is, like stopping AIDS in Africa. I mean, it's good, but I mean, it's like that's
Okay,
all you really got.
Okay, I'll even grant you that, but like he was a horrible
Yeah,
president.
like that's all they say. Like that's what
Yeah.
they say when they defend W.
Well, but they really just like the fact that he's, he was never dignified. It's kind of the weird thing, but I guess he's just old, and so they kind of project dignity onto him. And he was not as vulgar, mean as Trump or something, and they just kind of overlook the fact that he was a disaster. I mean, what were some of those photos of, George W. Bush and Michelle Obama all over each other. And it was like, oh, the good old days. That's when we had a real president or something. It's like, give me a break. I was an adult. I lived through that period.
The
He was a
reality of the
terrible
George
president.
W. Bush years was Jeffrey Epstein's painting of George Bush. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. As a toddler, looking
I
at what is
want
it?
I
He's like
want
a
a copy
toddler
of that.
throwing a
I
paper
want a
plate.
copy of that painting so badly.
I want the original. What are you talking about? A copy?
Yeah. I want George Bush to paint that photo for me. Paint that for me.
Was it who painted that actually?
Good
I
question.
don't. That is just a perfect vision of who he was. That is like the ultimate photo. Not photo, but the ultimate image of who he was.
I liked Bill Clinton in the blue dress too. I thought that was good too. You can see Jeffrey Epstein sit down and be like, "Hey, I want you to paint these guys as I understood them."
Right. Exactly. Maybe Bill Clinton wasn't like the worst president. Don't you think?
I don't know, man. He sort of struck me as a little too redneck.
Well, yeah, but he was, I mean, he was a highly intelligent redneck. He definitely came from those types of roots, but he was a go-getter. I'm just saying, like, when you look back at the 90s, I don't know. I don't think he's this, like, evil figure that conservatives make him out to be.
Doing away with Glass-Steagall seems to have been a complete and total utter disaster. I don't know, but I mean, I can't really critique too much. But outside of that,
yeah,
Larry Summers is unacceptable.
Yeah, it's all fair.
Clinton gave us the Commodity Futures Modernization Act during his lame duck, and that pretty much ushered in the financial crisis of 2008 by keeping over-the-counter derivatives unregulated. So
yeah, you have to understand, during the 90s, the kind of like new era thinking that was going on, particularly in the late 90s, not in the early 90s, there's a lot of kind of depression and declinism going on. But when I was just beginning college, the last couple of years of the 90s, and then before the dot-com bubble crash, there was a ton of just like, we won the Cold War. There will be no wars again outside of peacekeeping efforts, and markets regulate themselves, and all this stuff. That was all. I'm not sure he was that bad himself. He was kind of caught up in this wave of utopian thinking.
I mean, he was a product of the time, no doubt. I mean, that's beyond dispute.
While we're on the subject of history, I was wondering, Richard, do you share Charles's enthusiasm for Coolidge? He wrote a whole book about it, I understand, and he was kind of anti-progressive era in some ways.
I guess in some ways, yeah. I mean, we have the Immigration Act and all that kind of good stuff. So,
which he regarded as a progressive measure.
Yes, and interestingly, like Otis Graham, who's this historian, said it was the final act of the progressive era. So I think he was in the progressive era. I'm not sure he was really an anti-progressive. He might not have been as go-getter as some of the others. But yeah, I would look upon his presidency as quite good. Yeah.
Charles, do you make a major distinction between Coolidge and Hoover? Because I've read about both, and I always kind of lump them together in my mind. But then I think there are some crucial differences between them. I haven't read your book, but I wonder, because I would sort of guess, just based on knowing you, that you would not have the same enthusiasm for Hoover. Is that fair to say, Herbert Hoover?
Yeah, I mean, Coolidge is a product of Amherst, and he's a WASP, and he was deeply skeptical of Herbert Hoover. He said, for 6 years, that man's given me unsolicited advice, all of it bad. He referred to him dismissively as his wonder boy. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
And fuck Amherst. Fuck them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I happen to think that Charles Garman, who was the sort of like WASP thinker of that era, was actually a very important thinker, and they all studied under him, and they kept America out of various conflicts and wars.
It's just because it's
For
just
me,
because I'm a Williams Eve. It was tribal mentality. Sorry.
well, it's interesting, the role of Amherst and Williams, and kind of like the creation and propagation of a WASP and sort of WASP aligned elite, I think is vastly understudied. But Coolidge's view was progressivism through constitutional means, and Woodrow Wilson's view was progressivism through extra-constitutional means. And I think that's a fundamental distinction that needs to be kind of explored and thought through. I don't have the Amity Shlaes view. I mean, Amity Shlaes is a neocon libertarian. She doesn't really address the Immigration Act of 1924 or the fact that Coolidge was the guy who gave us the aircraft carrier, right? He was very into the latest technology. So he was a very interesting man. And my view basically, for what it's worth, is that I am not a Woodrow Wilson fan, because he sort of like used the Southerners to achieve his objectives. And that involved all kinds of compromises that I think undermined the strength of America long run. So,
I suffered through Amity Shlaes' biography of Coolidge. I think it's
I'm
probably
so sorry.
the most boring biography I've ever read. I kept waiting for her to get to some kind of compelling thesis, but I feel, in retrospect, I probably should have read your book instead.
Yeah, she tried to stop my book from being published back when I was 24 or whatever, writing that book. And that was my first real dealings with the neocon Jew publishing establishment, which was not very kind, to put it mildly, or meritocratic for that matter, or accurate even more. And I sort of learned the degree to which a lot of these foreigners prop up the Amity Shlaeses of the world to warp our understanding of our own history. So you can see that with people like Martin Gilbert, who is the guy who trained Larry Arnn at Hillsdale College, and who did all this work on Winston Churchill, essentially making Winston Churchill into a neocon.
Yes.
So there's a lot of these kind of projects that are done. You could see it with kind of the work that's been done with Monticello, right, where it's all about slavery all the time, right, and Sally Hemings. And of course, there's a genetics question as to whether or not Sally Hemings's children were actually fathered by Jefferson or by his brother, which is, I think, an open question, historically speaking. But, the fundamental difference that I have with the Claremont School is I actually like the administrative state. And I think the administrative state is actually useful at achieving a lot of political objectives that made America a world power. And so that's just the fundamental distinction I have with them. I think they are right to criticize some of Woodrow Wilson's excesses, like the idea of abolishing the Constitution in favor of a parliamentary system. Seems a little wrong-headed to me, to put it mildly. But on the whole, the progressive movement was an anti-mob movement, and I am anti-mob. So that's sort of how these things go.
And Charles, on that note, I was just a quick question. I was wondering if you would ever consider writing another history book, kind of a la Coolidge book, because I feel like with your knowledge of genealogy and espionage and political institutions, you could kind of fill a much needed gap. Because I feel like, especially literature about the early America and the founding fathers, it kind of falls into one of two categories. It's either kind of corny constitutional fetishists, hagiography, or else it's, like you said, shrill denunciations of slavery and Native American genocide. And I feel like, and I don't know if you've read either of these two books, maybe you or Richard or someone else can comment. I feel like the only time I've seen the proper tone being struck when writing about 19th century America and earlier is in two novels, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian and then Thomas Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. Those are probably honestly, those are probably like my two favorite novels of all time, at least at the moment. So, and I feel like you could write maybe in the nonfiction context a similarly um, sublime work, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
know
like
you're
those.
very.
I like those two novels quite a lot, actually, and I think you're onto something. If I were to write another book about an American president, I'd probably write about Obama or FDR. Those are the two that I'm kind of most interested in. Um, I also kind of eventually want to write a book about Joe Biden, like the real Joe Biden. Joe Biden as a creature of the WASP deep state. That's very interesting to me. You know, all the weird spook stuff he's been up to for his 50, 60 years of public life.
But Charles, could I request a reconsideration of trying to take back the term deep state in that way? Because I think you're actually talking about the security state or
Yeah,
the
so here's why I want to take it. So
unless
I
you're
agreed
treating it
with
like
what you
the
were
N word
saying.
and taking it back as such.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So I think if you have this view that there's a conspiracy of patriotic-minded people from all over the world that share the objective, kind of like the Illuminati, of basically working towards the national greatness or national bigness, as Chris Christie would have it. I think that is a very appealing notion, and it's something that anyone can be a participant in. And so I kind of I don't run away from the idea of there being a group of people that span hundreds of years that are basically toiling, sometimes in obscurity, sometimes in prominence, working towards these goals. I actually find it, kind of refreshing in a way. So I think that there was a view for a long time that there was no deep state, that was just a conspiracy, Donald's talking shit, whatever. And I want to answer him and say, no, there's a deep state, and we're coming for you, motherfucker. You know. And I think that's actually kind of what Chris Christie offers. That would be sort of my frame on it.
I just think that the issue is just, I mean, like, we still have three branches of government, and like we don't have four, and people keep claiming we have four, but we have three, and like, yeah, I mean it's just, I don't know, it just have to just be gentle with people. I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah, I guess I don't believe in the separation of powers. Like, I think the separation of powers thing is a nice idea, but in practice it doesn't really exist.
I mean, that's definitely the case in Illinois, where we have like mayors who like serve simultaneously as state legislatures and stuff, and it's just nuts.
I think
there's a formal power structure versus an informal power structure is what I'm mostly interested in. And like the degree to which America is a genealogical power in the way in which it cultivates these sort of noble families that over time become a part of what Adams called the national aristocracy. That is something I'm very interested in. And where those people come from and how they're educated and cultivated, all of that is very interesting. Like, if you ever just do the analysis about how related the founding fathers all are to each other, that's kind of telling in its way. And it's also, there's this other thing I'm toiling with called like unprincipled libertarianism, where it's like your default setting is limited government, but if like a Louisiana Purchase becomes available to you, you just rock and roll with it, right? Or a national space program becomes available to you, just go for it. And I think this idea is kind of appealing to me anyway. So
I guess I'm more interested in maybe almost the inverse of that. I like to call it principled populism. And maybe they actually could work in parallel, especially in relationship. If there were to be a fourth branch of the government, then it would be related to what Thomas Jefferson was talking about, that he would actually prefer a functioning press to a functioning government if he needed it. Because what he was actually talking about was the revolutionary function of the pamphleteers. And that's what I imagine that you're actually potentially talking about in terms of everyone can be a member of the deep state. We're talking about open source information warfare to some extent. And so then,
Yeah, precisely. Like, I think you and I fit into this category, and I think there's others in this space of like gentlemen open source researcher types, right? Gentlemen pamphleteers, and maybe that's what Substack is, or maybe that's kind of what these late night discussions are. It's kind of like a neighborhood watch of a sort, you know. So I think that that's a big part of it, and then I also think that increasingly, as the oligarchs kind of fall from power in this country, there are going to be those of us who have to go up to and talk to, you know, a Mark Andreessen or a David Sachs or a Peter Thiel or whoever, and basically force them to be patriotic, which is, of course, not their inclination, right? Like, we're going to have to figure out alternate ways of taxing these oligarchs. And that's effectively what Coolidge did back in the day and FDR did by basically turning a lot of them into foundations. So I think that that is a big thing as well. I also think one of the big problems in our country is that people don't really research their own families, and they don't sort of like see that they have greatness within them. You know, they sort of don't really listen to, they don't really cultivate the greatness within themselves. And that's sort of something I want people to do a lot more of. So that's sort of why I encourage a lot of these things. And I also think, you know, these things are not set in stone. Like, I'm not a fascist. I don't believe in some sort of genealogical supremacy or whatever. But I do believe that one should be proud of one's ancestors, and that the spirit of small r Republican virtue, which I saw tonight, you know, with Christie, where he's like talking to all these people as if they were his neighbors and friends and countrymen, because they are. You know, he wasn't talking at them through like large megaphones like Trump. He wasn't talking about how great he was, like El Duce or whatever. He was talking to them as if they were his neighbors. And I think that that whole spirit is very, very powerful. It's actually like the most powerful thing in this country. Like, the role of public opinion formation is actually like probably the most important thing. And it's also, it requires careful cultivation. It requires serious, studious research. And that's kind of what's in short supply, I think, in the country as a whole. And there's lots of ways that that is suppressed, right? It's suppressed through the Twitter algorithm, through, you know, the means of communication being owned in the ways that they're owned. But it's interesting to me how that keeps just reasserting itself, right? Like the early blogging days, you know, around Obama's era, or kind of like the rise of, you know, open source research. All of that is very interesting to me, personally. And maybe the most interesting thing going on today. I mean, I wrote this piece today about Barack Obama and the ways in which I think he was blackmailed. I don't know if any of you have had occasion to read it. I know Jeremy read it and a few others have read it. But, you know, I'm very interested in that. How do we fix the problem of politicians being blackmailed or compromised, or being, you know, making it impossible for them to see the light on various issues? How do we fix that? That's unclear to me.
Well, your article is I think, in a good step in that direction about exploring what it may take. Because part of it, when you're talking about someone at the scale of a president, it's that it's not just them personally being blackmailed, but the country, we're implicated in the blackmail. So there's two things that have to happen at the same time in a way. There is an unpacking of the blackmail of the individual, right? And that's what your piece begins down that road towards in terms of who is actually Obama. What are the areas that he didn't want to be disclosed publicly? What are his actual origins? All of that. And now some of that, obviously, like we've discussed, we have bits of dispute about that, the specifics, but the generality of that is really crucial, because then you're then also decompromising the nation to some extent, and almost in a way, in terms of our history, that we begin to have a deconflicted relationship with our own history, even though we can feel traumatized by the deception at first.
Yeah, and there's also this question of like how do you deal with people who are compromised, right? Like how do you free them, right? And this is kind of the piece I was writing about, thinking about the gay straight issue of being pride, pride for everyone. This idea of like how do you free people from their own closets? That was a very interesting idea to me.
Yeah, and it is interesting watching the evolution of Obama, right, on gay marriage, especially in terms of what you wrote, and thinking back about how personal that might have been in terms of his public projection. But in general, I totally agree with that, especially if you look back at like the actual deep state compromise of the highest levels of our institution. It's obvious that someone like Hoover, or as you started to point out, someone like Nixon, even, that the sort of closeted aspect, it really is a national security problem. So it makes a lot of sense to open it up with pride and acts sort of honoring same-sex marriages and things like that.
So I'm not sure if this is just collective silence, but I just wanted
Yeah,
to
I fixed it.
just go. Actually, just go to Tamer. I'll or whatever. Yeah, just go first. All good.
Hi guys, hi Charles. How are you?
I'm great, Timer.
Uh,
Here.
uh, it's really very nice that I bumped into you like a couple of months ago because I'm doing a study. I call it strategic democracy, and I just finished
Thank you for
studying
dinner.
the behavior of the. Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just got back. Go ahead, Tamer.
Yeah, I did a study. I call it strategic democracy, and I studied the behavior of the president and the executive branch of government since President Carter until now. And I just finished the federal, and right now I am gathering people. I'm looking for uh, about 3 to 5 people per state. 5 will be better. To collect data on the state level. And in response to your question, how do we solve the issue of compromised politicians? The intention, once the state study is done, is just to give it to politicians and people that vote and say these are the needs in the different states and these are the different kind of synergies we need to establish in order to improve the health, wealth, and power of our country. There are other variables also. And there are different models. And from what I've been listening to you, I'm very impressed, especially with the way you look at how the politicians are compromised. And I never really looked at it that way. So you gave me a lot of insight. And I'd like to discuss these things in more detail, but on a space like this, I can't talk too
No, we should
much.
definitely do that at some point in the near term, and I appreciate you coming into these discussions. I mean, for me, one of the reasons I talk about a lot of historical stuff is so that I can talk about present things. Because every time you do a history, you're really talking about the present, right? And so I can tell you I have encountered and dealt with a number of members of Congress over the years that are compromised in different ways. And it comes in all forms. It comes through their wife getting a special job or their kids getting a job they don't deserve. It comes through money. It comes through women. It comes through all kinds of things. They're human beings, so they are in some sense representative. So for me, one of the reasons I like to write about these things and do the real hardcore research is that you can expose these networks and basically free these people and let them be what they set out to be, which is the best versions of themselves. So that's to me what's interesting. And I do like the idea of kind of like when you're dealing with a computer virus where you're trying to kick the computer virus out. You have to do like, hard boot. You have to identify the holes in your software so you can patch them. I kind of feel like democracy is the same kind of way. And it is true that there are lots of compromised judges, compromised members of Congress, compromised state and local officials. I've seen it over the course of my entire life. And I think about it a lot in the context of like, I've talked about this before, Brian Joyce, who was the third most powerful Democrat in the state legislature, who was a neighbor of mine growing up in the Boston area. And, his son, Jake, went to Harvard, which is, of course, supposedly one of our elite schools, but we've seen the degree to which our elite schools are compromised. And so I've kind of come to this conclusion that we have this sort of problem in the global order where there's all this money flowing, and the money is used to compromise our companies, our people in higher positions. And there's kind of this like bribocracy that takes place that really makes a kind of mockery of meritocracy. And in some cases, the people pretend that they're a meritocracy themselves. So you see that with David Sachs, for instance. He claims that it's a meritocracy. Or in other cases, you'll see like they will go and they'll try to smother companies that are competitors to them and act in a very kind of mobbed up kind of way. Cyan Bannister, who is a venture capitalist that I used to be quite friendly with, actually stayed at her home. She described it as being married to the mob, that there's a kind of actual mob that dictates the formation of a lot of our companies. So anyway, my basic thinking over the last few years is that we can basically clean up a lot of these things by sharing techniques with each other, and that we can actually expose a lot of these networks. And so I have a number of frames that I use. I use the genealogical frame, right? Who are people related to? What are they a part of? How do they make money? What are their vices? I always ask myself this when I'm doing business. I always say, like, what is my business partner's vice, right? And if I can't answer that question, I really don't know them well enough to be doing business. So I sort of demur from doing a business deal. And what I found is that, people who have lust as a vice are actually not that bad, or even wrath are not that bad. But it's really the ones that I get in trouble with that are envy or greed that are the ones that really drive things. So anyway, this is the things that I kind of spend a lot of time thinking about. And one of the things that's been very helpful about these spaces is I like to write a lot, but I also increasingly trying to learn how to speak publicly or to talk to other people. And I like having my ideas out there into the world so I can train other people in the frames, and then they can in turn train other people. And I like doing it in a kind of low key, manner where we can, feed our cats or pick up our kids or, cook spaghetti or whatever, or like, it be in our pajamas. Because I think as a neighborhood watch, it's very, very powerful. And so I look for these kind of things going on in the society. So for me, the town hall that Christie had today is an example of this. It's not perfect, right? It has its limitations, as all things on camera do. People spend more time on the kind of presentation, but anyway, that's sort of how I've come to think about it. And I think over the next few years, what we're going to see is that the ability to do serious level research is going to get even more democratized, such that like people will be able to do their own genetic sequencing. If I have my druthers by taking over Clearview, or at least cleaning up Clearview, a lot of people will be able to have facial recognition software, which I think will change an awful lot of how the conversation goes in the world, particularly when it comes to identifying malfeasance. So I think that there's a kind of surveillance approach that David Brin talks about rather than a surveillance approach that is ultimately going to really upend a lot of the oligarchs and the cultists and the kind of people who are kind of trying to destroy our civil society. And I know, it's become fashionable to talk about it as undermining our democracy. But what it's really doing is it's undermining quality middle class existence, which I think is crucial for actually having a well functioning society. If we're in a world where basically we're all serfs on the fiefdoms of some like large feudal lords, that's like not a healthy society to live in. And I think that society is actually like what is very like powerful. It's very much in control and has been for quite a while, and big chunks of our economy. So those are just
Yeah, uh, I uh, I like the part that you talked about the genealogy and the analysis. This is how I used it, which is really parallel to what you're saying. That we analyze people's, first of all, health starts at the dining table. So it's what you eat. So now, what can we do to have better health? Because if we have better health, which is probably the most important variable, because you have to live before you can do. So what is it that we can do for that?
well, I
Using the
think
technology that we
yeah, I think
talked
there's lots of
about.
solutions. I mean, I think we could sequence our food to figure out better ways of growing it.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
going
go
to
ahead.
say what is it that
Yeah,
I want
go
to
ahead,
do, if
Timur.
you
Go
don't
ahead.
mind. Thank you. So basically, what I do is I create symbiotic and synergistic solutions. Instead of looking at one item, we can say, okay, good health starts at the table. So what is it that we need? We need to eat good food. So why don't we start growing good food? And we have about 500,000 people that are homeless. Why don't we let them work and house them in these places? At the same time, when we do that, and this has to be organized across the states, and that's why I need to get data from the various states in order to determine what's the best synergistic and symbiotic combination. So basically, when we have good food, that means people get sick less. That means healthcare costs less, which is another story that we need to approach as well. So now we solve the health issue. At the same time, we solve the unemployment issue or the homeless issue. And then we should have a rotating door kind of mechanism for people unemployed. And this is where we look at our balance of trade and we see whatever we have a deficit in, we start producing those things and we employ the unemployed and the homeless to produce these things. Now, we organize this in a way because we want to reduce the deficit. And then we want to have reserve money. So we organize this in a way where the profit, and I'm just giving examples right now, the profit, 20% of it goes to reserve, 30% of it goes to the deficit, and the remainder is distributed to everyone that's involved in it. So you have a combination of central and decentral organization. And in that situation, you can work like a slide ruler. If things are clear, you centralize. If things are turbulent and not clear, you decentralize. No system can exist without the combination of the two. That's why, for example, cryptocurrency and blockchain is BS, because there is no system that can exist uh, that doesn't have both polarities, central and decentral. When I had a real job, I had different ledgers in different countries using Oracle Financial. And the reason for that was because the laws were different. In England, they had different laws. In Morocco, different laws. In the United States, different laws. So it was very logical to put different ledgers, and then you have a master ledger that combines all of them because of the rules and regulations of these countries, the different countries. Now, the concept of cryptocurrency is exactly like that. And I mean blockchain. So blockchain already was in existence before they called it a blockchain. We used to call it a process. The only thing is this process is good if used correctly because it adheres to the minimum motion principle. In other words, you don't need as many iterations, which reduces the hierarchy. And these are the kind of solutions that I work
Yeah,
on.
I think
in
you're
order
not
to
you're not wrong about the issue of food. I think there's a reason though that the food has gotten so bad in the country. And I think a lot of it has to do with the consolidation of the food industry and the sort of lack of regulations here when it comes to food and food safety and food quality. And I think
And the fact that a substantial fraction of the corn grown in the United States is not eaten by humans, but eaten by animals to grow animal protein
correct.
for downstream consumption.
Correct. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of problems there, but I take your point. Let's go to Michael real quick.
Yeah, well, this actually dovetails perfectly because I was just gonna. Well, yeah, it dovetails perfectly. I'm gonna talk about the Trump thing I put. I'm obviously riding with Biden, relatively speaking, but definitely. But first, I just want to say, I know that people hate like when they're just called out in the audience, but I just want to say, to Miss Sarah Unziger, like I just really I was so impressed with your appearance on Mark Maxwell's show on St. Louis media area, and I just wishing you well. Absolutely, like just I was genuinely super duper impressed.
Yeah,
But
if people
yeah,
aren't following like what's going on in Missouri and the rollback of kind of like the mob figures that are at work there, then you're missing like a very important story in our country. I think it's crucially important, and I think that everyone has an interest in seeing that Missouri gets fixed, particularly as it's a kind of key part of the kind of food ecosystem we were just talking about.
oh,
Some
absolutely, like so much, like it's like so much farmland all throughout Missouri. I couldn't agree more, and especially like it's really important with the farm bill. Like they do it every 6 years. And now it's time. I have no idea how that's going. I mean, they just held hearings and stuff, but it is really interesting because in this video, like Trump talks about like taking a wrecking ball to like food, like like overhauling like our food and stuff, and it's just really interesting. Like I hate to put you on blast, Charles, because you're in Sugarland right now, but it you said this yourself, like how it's insane how like not anyone from either party will say anything bad about sugar. It's like unbelievable because like we all know it's bad, we all know it's like insane, we all know it's like detrimental, but like no one's saying anything, and it's just I don't know. It just blows my mind, and I just found it very interesting. Especially with this whole Trump thing, it's also just crazy. Like, I mean, he's like the guy that gets McDonald's for the for the college football team or whatever. And also, I just like his court. His well, not his court. The Supreme Court. They watered down waters of the United States in the Clean Air Act. And I just find that really just very interesting, and just
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
just
I mean,
good
that
follow
court
Sarah.
happened because of the compromise that I'm talking about, right? That's a key. Controlling judges is a key part of foreign intelligence operations here, and we need to kind of understand it in those terms. You know, I mean,
I also just with Missouri, it's very interesting. I mean, it seems like the whole Missouri v. Biden is going. Just they're doing their thing. It's just very interesting how Louisiana and Missouri are teaming up in that effort. I must say that's very intriguing to me.
Did anyone see that ad narrated by John Hamm for Josh Hawley's Challenger? I mean, that's like one of the first political ad that I've seen that like genuinely impressed me. I was
I
shocked.
didn't see it. What was
Lucas
said in it?
Coates.
He was just talking about like manliness, like how Josh Hawley is writing a book about manliness, and I think the
It's
final
sad.
line was he was like, if you want to learn how to be manly, some guy wrote a book about it. And the guy who's challenging Josh Hawley is a Marine, so he was kind of playing that up. But yeah, you should watch it. it's kind of a masterpiece of political propaganda. But obviously I hope that guy beats Hawley. I have family in Missouri.
Lucas Coons, a man who saw the burn pits himself. Like, seriously.
My read is that the U.S. deep state is going to clean up Missouri and Texas. And I think a lot of the reasons they're going to do it is because of the role of Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley in the fake electors scam. I think that is a crucial thing. And then obviously you saw Ken Paxton, Texas v. Pennsylvania, that lawsuit. I think that is a big reason why Paxton's futures have ebbed. So the question becomes, what do you think January 6th was about? And I think there's a lot of divisions there. That's kind of my general sense. But yeah, I think we should pay a lot of attention to what happens in Missouri and Texas.
Absolutely. Oh, Charles, sorry, this is actually a really important. I actually think this is pretty important. So, basically, like in the House of Representatives today, the United States House of Representatives, like, what is it? I think 11 or 12, like Republicans, they just voted no for the debate rules to stop gas stove, like stop allegedly the Biden administration from banning gas stoves. So like the Republicans just all voted no, and it's the first time a debate rules has failed by the speaker. Like speaker like supported like debate rules have like failed since 2002. They're always like the debate rules always pass. And I
say again, Michael. I didn't hear the last sentence.
Sorry, like. I can't remember, but like they're all voting no because they say that McCarthy's now holding his end of the bargain, like on the rules or whatever. So they're all like they're just committing to voting no, like Chip Roy, Andy Biggs, like they're gonna vote no on literally everything until McCarthy like changes his tune. It's like I'm not sure what's happening, but it's like literally it's just broken right now. It's just insane.
Well, I mean, McCarthy's speakership ended when he did the deficit deal, the debt deal. But he's supposed to lose, and he's supposed to lose to Hakeem Jeffries. So that'll be the story of the next few months. His defeat.
It's a crazy. Like, I'm just not sure like where we go from here. like they're gonna have the motion to vacate, otherwise we're just gonna be like in like
the motion to vacate won't pass though.
Yeah, it's just crazy though, because like I mean the Democrat, like I'm not sure why the Democrats would like vote to keep McCarthy. That's the insane thing.
Well, they'll extort their own price, right? So, I mean, it all comes down to what you think the problem of McCarthy is, and I think that McCarthy's been re-compromised by Biden, in much the same way that Tip O'Neill had control over Ronald Reagan in the negotiations. Biden has control over Kevin McCarthy. You could see this with the piece I wrote about re-compromise them all. The piece I wrote about McCarthy and the role of Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a number of these people that have gotten all kinds of weird money into their campaign accounts, and now they're getting some attention by the feds, and that's in turn making them behave in all these interesting ways.
Oh yeah, with Marjorie Taylor Greene, absolutely. Like, I'm not sure what like was in her like Cheerios in the morning or whatever, but like she was talking about how like we like don't release some of the footage because of like security concerns, and I'm like where have you been all this time? Like, what are you talking about?
If you think about it, if it's under $200 threshold, there doesn't need to be any disclosure, right? So there's lots of money that moves through campaign accounts, particularly in federal office, from people that are like causing chaos, and they get huge amounts of money. And then that money, of course, they use to do all kinds of things, right? To pay their party dues, to back other political candidates. And it's become a huge issue as time has gone on. And the feds eventually catch up to it, but not before all the money's been raised. You see? So that's a key detail that I think most people don't really understand.
I mean, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene such a fundraising genius? Right? Does anyone here know anyone who's donated to her? Right? I mean, I don't. I do a lot of things in politics, and she seems to be just a juggernaut at raising money. So the question is why? And I think it's because she's had a lot of money routed to her by all kinds of foreign actors.
Wasn't there a whole piece of the 2016 campaign, Andy Kawija,
Yeah,
about the
Andy Kawija, yeah.
Kawaja?
I
Okay,
met
thank
him
you.
actually at the Trump Hotel, of all places. He was introduced to me by Charlie Kirk.
When was that?
That would have been 2017.
Wow. And what was the scheme that they would put a bunch of micro donations together
Yeah,
and wash them?
they had this ability to take like $10 million and turn it into like tens of thousands of fake donors. That was how they were doing it.
Yeah, I mean, like campaign finance is absolutely a washing machine. Like no doubt about that.
Yeah, so they figured out how to do that in a strategic way of moving money in different ways.
And was that related to the Citizens United decision,
Citizens
or
United
was
is a
that?
part of it, but it's also a function of like how in federal elections you don't have to disclose, the address, you don't have to disclose, like the information doesn't have to be legit. And there won't be any chargebacks because the money's legit, right? So think about it like, you get all these donations from Al Smith or Joe Smith or whatever, right? There's no like clear guarantee who these people are, right? So what ends up happening is you raise a whole bunch of money and you think you're hot shit, and everyone sees that you raised all this money, but it turns out the money is actually fake. It's from a foreign government. And by the time the foreign government gets in trouble for it, it's already been 2 or 3 election cycles because of the speed with which the feds catch up.
Well, what should we should we have something like public financing of elections, especially since like media is much less expensive now?
To be honest with you, I don't know what we should do, but I think we should stop that.
Yeah.
I'm of the view that when people donate, they should provide a lot more information about themselves, but there are people who believe that that's a violation of their rights by requiring them to disclose who they are. And there are also those who actually make a case that actually there are a lot of foreign governments that are helpful to the US in different ways, and they should be allowed to participate through our system, even though it's illegal. So I don't know. I don't know what I think about it. It is weird.
Well,
I have to say I really like the approach. They call it democracy dollars or whatever. They give you like I think they're doing it in Washington or something. I don't know. Like they give you like $50 to $100 just to donate to political campaigns, and like it's can't do anything else with it basically. And that's like the main way. It's just kind of like Democrats really tried to ram hard with the public financing, but it's just really hard to like sell because it's like, oh, I'm gonna like subsidize this like failing candidate and stuff, and it's like it's like we obviously have to like do like so much and need so much more disclosure. It's just a
Well, the
really
biggest predictor of whether or not somebody's
it's
going
just
to
tough.
win
It's just tricky.
isn't how much money
It's
they
so tricky.
raise. It's how many donors they have. And I think that's very interesting.
Well, that was the case for the DNC, I think too, like 40,000 or whatever. And it's also just crazy, like Vivek Ramaswamy already has 40,000. I'm like just wow, like impressive, like
Well, assuming
all these
those numbers
people.
are legit. I don't know that they're legit.
Yeah,
One of the things I
yeah. I
learned
mean,
about
but
WinRed, which was Jared Kushner's innovation, is like how it allowed for all kinds of weird money laundering. And I've had people there's been all kinds of inquiries and investigations into this, but it's a real problem. Of course, it doesn't seem to have much of an effect. However much money you raise, you still have to talk to voters, and dollars don't vote. But it is distressing, I must say.
yeah, and like Donald J. Trump is like the number one proof of that. Like Jeb raised all the money one could ask for, and he was out by South Carolina or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, the voters make a decision about you.
Or Bloomberg on the other side in
I guess the
2020.
question that I have about the Bloomberg race was, so he spent $1 billion to build a very good voter machine for the Democrats. So did he spend $1 billion for himself, or did he spend $1 billion to build a great state-of-the-art get out the vote machine for the Democrats?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that he himself didn't want to be president, or at least he wasn't acting like it. So yeah, there is something kind of weird there in terms of.
Yeah. And Kevin,
I mean, yeah. He threw the election. He threw the election by like not campaigning in Iowa.
well, this is the
New
question:
Hampshire,
did he
Nevada,
throw
or
it,
whatever.
or did he deliberately? Was he doing something other than just running for office? So this is the theory that I have about Chris Christie, which is, I think the U.S. deep state wants to control an awful lot of different parts of this election. So they obviously have Joe Biden as their deep state Democrat. And I think actually RFK, I know you talked about him earlier, Jeremy. I think there's something very interesting going on with RFK that is much more sophisticated than I think we really understand currently. My theory of the case is that RFK knows that there's this force that killed his father and his uncle, and that he is cozying up to that force to spy on it and learn all about it going into the 2024 cycle. And that's why he's really running for office.
And your direct
Charles,
encounter with him would be, would suggest that that could be the case.
That's a
And I guess
possibility. He could have also been spying on me, trying to figure out what I knew. So that's the negative take.
Yeah, I guess my concern
I don't know what
about
I believe actually on that, by the way, for what it's worth.
Yeah, my concern is that some of the forces that at the very least, like, he's playing with, whether he's playing them or they're playing him or whichever way it's going, that it's the kind of thing that could potentially get dangerously out of control. But nothing would please me more than to know that RFK Jr. in the end was actually playing a reverse pincher move against the David Sacks and the Steve Bannons.
It would make a lot of sense.
It was insane how Sachs was also on the Twitter space. I'm just like, wow, like just like Ron DeSantis must have been so pissed like when he saw like Sachs and crew just chilling with and even Alan, but I don't know, like Christina Pushaw, she posted a video of RFK today, like I think talking about vaccines or something. Like, I'm just like, I'm not sure why she's posting a video of a Democrat in a Republican primary. It's just very interesting. I mean, quote unquote, Democrat to one's interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
would you ever
go ahead, Bryce?
Would you ever consider doing a space on Saran and the whole RFK assassination? Because I've heard so many people, obviously including his son, say they don't believe he killed him, but there's just so many weird things about it, like that it's like on video and he's there with the gun, and in his diary he was writing about how he wanted to kill RFK, and it's just, and he basically admitted that
Go ahead. Tell the people.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all of it, but it's very obvious that Sirhan was a Manchurian candidate type MK Ultra candidate, basically, and it does look like his potential handler. Very interestingly, I think the guy's name is Brian with a Y. I think it's William Bryan, and he had worked as a consultant on John Frankheimer's film, The Manchurian Candidate, actually. And RFK actually spent the night before his assassination at Frankheimer's home in Malibu. I believe Frankheimer actually drove RFK towards downtown LA, the Ambassador Hotel. And the whole Palestinian aspect of it and the way the Zionist mob has framed it all up, and it's the forensics of it are the clearest of any of these kinds of assassinations that we're familiar with. In terms of Noguchi, the LA coroner was very clear that the powder traces were from behind RFK's ear and very close, like right behind his right ear, whereas Sirhan was in front. They've done all of the acoustical investigations. Serious journalists have had experts look at it, and there's way too many gunshots for Sirhan's gun. And so, and then there's also this case of the woman in the polka dot dress, who was seemed to be connected with Sirhan. Maybe they showed up together, and she sort of fed him into the mix, and then she was running outside saying, "We got him, we got him." But it's fairly clear that the actual assassin came from behind RFK's ear, and it was very likely a Lockheed Martin. By the way, it looks like a Skunkworks security guy named Thane Caesar. And I just started thinking about Skunkworks. I brought up the possibility before that Skunkworks might have been compromised by Mossad elements in the figure of Ben Rich, who ultimately takes over Skunkworks in the 70s, but was at Skunkworks under Kelly, I think his name, who actually began all of the stealth work there. And so it's pretty clear that it was a false flag assassination, and that it was really meant to be the first big act of Palestinian terrorism in the United States. And that's why you saw today all these Zionist elements talking about how it was this Palestinian terrorist who killed RFK because of his love for Israel. And so that's, of course, why I'm so concerned about this close game that RFK Jr. is playing with the Shmuley Boteachs and this entire Zionist network. Now, I would love for it to turn out that he's playing them.
Shmuley blackmailed Cory Booker until Cory Booker broke away from them at one point. On
that's a good point. And right, so wasn't there Booker was part of like a Chabad network, wasn't he? Right. At Yale?
At Yale and at Oxford.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I have a theory, which is that there's so RFK Jr.'s son is a CIA officer, which is interesting. And I think that what's happened is that I think RFK has reached a certain age. I think he believes the vaccine stuff quite sincerely, which, by the way, a lot of intelligence people do. For what it's worth, there's a lot of vaccine skepticism among CIA, National Reconnaissance Office, those types. Just being blunt with you, it's a major reason I didn't get vaccinated was because a number of my spook friends were skeptical of the vaccines. So make of that what you will. And he's also very close with James O'Keefe, who has all kinds of connections with the weird Israeli world. And so there's all sorts of weird questions about what is the real deal with RFK Jr. And I don't know. I can tell you, I did have a conversation with him once upon a time. It went on for about an hour and a half, where we discussed the assassination of his father and brother. And we also talked about Oliver Stone and all the Arnon Milchan stuff that Jeremy and I have talked about. So I don't know. It does seem very telling to me. And of course, the question is, he has a new wife, RFK. And if you look at who RFK Jr.'s wife is, his new wife, that is, it's Cheryl Hines. Cheryl Hines was, of course, on the, she's, a rather famous, how would I describe her? She's basically a famous actress of a sort. And she is very, very heavily involved in basically Mossad, CIA connection world. So yeah, I don't know. So yeah, Robert Francis Bobby Kennedy III is married to a writer, peace activist, and former CIA officer, Amaryllis Hope Fox, and she's written about her work in the CIA and her involvement and everything. Anyway, that's his daughter-in-law. So make of that what you will. I don't know.
Cheryl Hines, part of the infamous Seinfeld Mossad nexus. So if RFK Jr. is really cozying up to these Israeli elements, which I think you implied, I could have misheard you, but why would he still be bringing up that he believes his Saran was a did not murder his father or was a Manchurian candidate, why would he continue to bring that up in the media?
Why would he?
Is
Why
he
would he
playing?
continue to do that? Because maybe it's a way of signaling to other people what's really going on. I mean, I don't think.
Well, but doesn't that kind of enrage the Israelis, even like on its face?
No,
Because I
because
mean, he
he
was
says the
supposedly a
conspiracy
Palestinian
theory that
terrorist.
his father and uncle were killed by the CIA. That's his conspiracy
Oh,
theory.
so
Yes.
well, but it still sort of delegitimizes the Palestinian terror. I mean, maybe it's kind of a irrelevant point to them, but it seems like that would still upset Israelis that you're saying Saran was innocent, more or less.
Yeah, but it can all these kinds of these real deep operations are multi-layered, including the cover-up aspect of it. And so it is the case that a benign explanation for RFK Jr. continuing to always talk about that, that he believes someone other than Sirhan killed his father. It could be right that he's basically saying no, it's not what you guys say. But the other part of it is it does then fit in with the whole Oliver Stone approach, the Arnon Milchan Israeli nuclear intelligence financing of the JFK assassination theory, which is all about a shadowy room of unnamed CIA and Pentagon officials with no whiff of the Israeli component. So
Yeah.
it
So
can the explanation could go both ways. I could see.
yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I think for me anyway, what's interesting is, you remember in 2016, what's his name ran for president. Bernie Sanders ran for president, sort of Russian connected, right? There was sort of the question of Russian ties with Bernie. And then in 2018, the person who ran for president or ran and sort of took over the leftist energy was AOC. And AOC has all kinds of CIA connections if you look closely at her. So there's this sort of tradition of having people run who are basically like not supposed to win, or who are supposed to sap the energy from the other candidates. So there's a lot of that I think goes on. Sort of like, the question is, do you believe that Joe Kent really wanted to win that House seat or not? Or do you think he was there just to take out, the person he took out, right, in the primary?
Butler,
What's that?
Jamie Herrera
That's right.
Butler.
So the question becomes, how many of these elections are legit and how many of them are ops being run? And this brings us, of course, back to Chris Christie, which is that, is Chris Christie the deep state Republican that's supposed to run in this cycle? And I think the answer is yes, he is. He is that person. Because the deep state clearly wants a Republican in the race that favors, that basically is anti-Trump, and is, media savvy.
It is also very
And
anti-Kushner.
anti-Kushner, extremely anti-Kushner. He brought up Kushner 3 times tonight.
That's a good sign. And so Chris Christie putting the Godzilla back in the GOP.
Yeah. Well, Tom Kaine is the reason he became the first U.S. attorney appointed after 9/11. And Tom Kaine said, we need you to clean up the Israeli problem in New Jersey. And then he indicted Charles Kushner. So, make of that what you will.
I just have to say, sorry. I'll just say this real quick. It's just weird because like Joe Kent's running again, so I really don't know what to make of the situation.
Well, it could be he's blocking it, and it could be that. Look, I think there's a lot of people who run for office, and they just lose. They like raise lots of money to tax a network and then lose deliberately. The question is,
I mean, I don't disagree that it seems like he's throwing the election. Like he tried to like be off-putting to people. It's like crazy.
yeah.
Well, and it is the case that if I were a strategic consultant for, okay, I'll use the American deep state, let's say, in terms of the RFK Jr. figure, who has, as you pointed out, tons of access to the quote unquote alt media and the podcast mafia, the PayPal mafia, and all of these guys, that it would work very well to create some kind of divide and conquer sinkhole, especially as you see him being fought over by the the DeSantis types and then the Bannon Trump types. So
Well, just
so
think
that's
about it.
that.
Think
Yeah.
about it. Think about it. Okay. We have an Israeli intelligence operation that was run against Hunter Biden, the president's son. We have the blackmail operation against Barack Obama and against Donald Trump that was run. We have the Kushner, enrichment before, during, and after Trump's presidency. And so, who would be the person that you would want? You would want somebody like an RFK Jr., who was able to go into any of these rooms, right? Because he's a celebrity, because he's a Kennedy, because he's this, because he's that. And I think this is also a major reason we saw the Wesley Clark Jr. Podcast, right, which was about the ways in which these American psyops are run against the children of preeminent, prominent people. So who better than RFK Jr.? Like, could you think of anyone who could get better access to all these networks? I can't.
I can't either. And if this is the plan, and if this is true, then I would hope that we would actually see then RFK Jr. in the executive branch in a second term. That's the way I could see it ending up properly.
Maybe, but remember, there's lots of Kennedys already in the executive branch, right? Caroline Kennedy as ambassador to Australia was talked about as a future New York senator. So,
Yeah, but
The one tried to run for New Jersey against Jeff Van Drew, like Amy Kennedy, whatever.
back in the
Amy
day.
Kennedy, maybe.
Yep.
Well,
and then you had the other Kennedy who ran against Markey and lost, right?
Yeah. Joe Kennedy the third.
Joe Kennedy the third.
But I think you need an RFK Jr. Type voice at the very least, and he's the strongest that I think we've seen publicly speaking on what you might call the domestic true threat, national security threat to the actual physical body politic. When you combine the question of the vaccines and the food and the capture of all of these agencies by the sort of corporate and totally foreign compromised aspects, that it would make sense to actually have a strong voice like RFK Jr. in a position where he could recapture the administrative state. That's the way I would see it.
Yeah, and he could also bleed off support for a non-Biden Democrat too, right? Like if you recall the history here, right? Like Jimmy Carter faced Senator Ted Kennedy, as a spoiler candidate against him in, 1980? And obviously that had the effect of like damaging Carter ahead of his reelect, which led to Reagan getting elected. So you can look at the RFK Jr. race against Biden in a similar context, right? He seems to be not drawing any blood against Biden, though, which is interesting. He doesn't seem to really be going after Biden at all, actually.
True, but that's the main strategic question, is whether it actually is a Ted Kennedy operation or whether it's something different, because that was a crucial aspect of what was a much deeper coup against Carter. And we should probably discuss this another night, but the whole question of the Iran Revolution and the blowback from Carter's Halloween massacre, of trying to what looks like clean up the covert cowboy operators in the CIA, and then that looking like it immediately blew back into the installation of Khomeini and the creation of the hostage crisis, which is really the birth of the American televised war on terror, the 444 days on TV.
Why would RFK Jr.'s son go fight in Ukraine?
Yes, very, very interesting, and that he doesn't disown him, even though he continues to sort of mouth certain Russian propaganda talking points, but he still keeps him close, and he keeps his wife, his daughter-in-law close. And then you bring in like Cornel West now announcing under
Yep.
this highly suspicious People's Party,
Yep.
this Nick Brana compromise operation, and announcing with Russell Brand and that whole sort of, Cantor Fitzgerald Russia operation at Rumble, and then whatever's happening with Rumble and Twitter, sounds like there's something about to happen there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more skeptical of Rumble, all things considered, but I'm not. It's very unclear to me. Like the turn of Peter Thiel too. Like Peter Thiel has been very quiet this election, right? Which is a tell to me that something very interesting is going on.
It's almost the opposite of the flamboyance that he hit the 2016 stage with. That was sort of one of the most uncomfortable moments of the Trump campaign, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was present for it, obviously, and Peter and I have since fallen out of favor with one another. Like I'm of the view that Peter's kind of an alien to our system, and so I think Peter's strength tracks the strength of Germany. So if Germany is weaker, he will be weaker. It's kind of my take on it, for what it's worth. And I think he also understands the importance of shutting up right now and letting Elon and David Sachs step in it. It's kind of my sense. So yeah, I mean, and we haven't even really gotten into the SEC and the cryptocurrency stuff, right? But like the SEC has listed Solana as a cryptocurrency, which of course is something that Sachs is on camera discussing with Jason Calacanis and
Are
Shimon.
those crimes on camera that they admitted to, basically?
Yeah, I've always said that my favorite true crime podcast was the All In podcast, which is rough. But yeah,
Criming on camera.
I find it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just real quick. I just find it insane how Binance, they have like the like those logos like besides the verified thing like. I mean, all in of course has one too, but like Binance, like the fact that Binance like had like the like logo and now they're getting the hammer dropped on them is very amusing to me.
yeah, and I also think that we should. I know a lot of us are pro-vaccine in this space, but I think many of us should consider the possibility that the vaccines are not good or not good for everyone in quite the same way, and that maybe profits off of vaccines are not good for the larger population. Maybe public health should be a public core responsibility. And what does that look
Exactly.
like if we have
Yeah.
we have privatized vaccine manufacturing, we've privatized a lot of things in our society. So there are larger questions here than I think RFK is capable of raising. Whether he succeeds or not, I think is kind of an open question. But I think the vaccine is very much I look at COVID and 9/11 as a very similar phenomenon. I don't know how you feel about this, Jeremy, but
Definitely.
they seem very linked to me, just in spirit.
Yeah, like an inciting act, and then a quote unquote response to it that has massive both domestic implications and international implications. And then this whole question of like, there's a deep connection, I think, between the weaponization and the sort of elimination of the nutrition in our food over like basically a whole century. I saw congressional reports from probably 100 years ago of when the minerals in the soil had already been largely depleted. And real basic, micronutrients are crucial to human health. And then I think you see the rise of the vaccine industrial complex aligned with the pharmaceutical industrial complex as you see the sort of plummeting of food quality and bionutrients and the
Definitely.
sort of consolidation of farmlands into these big CAFO operations. And there are ways to heal all of this, but it's going to take really big thinking and bold action.
Yeah, and I think it's going to take antitrust first.
I'll just say that like the main. I mean, I'm obviously quite proactive. Like the main, and don't get me wrong, like we got a lot to do in like reducing topsoil degradation and all that stuff. But the main thing is like the life expectancy has. I mean, obviously, as of late, it's been kind of tough, but it went up quite a bit since that's the main anti like to what you're saying. Like just the life expectancy has been going up all throughout the 1900s and stuff.
I mean,
Well,
the two can also not be related to each other, right?
I suppose.
You know.
well, and a lot of that actually leveled out. It looks like, and there's big breakthroughs, of course. Of you thinking of things that seem to be minor in history, like cooked glazed ware, like that was crucial in terms of bacteria, or running water in toilets, and all of those kinds of things are make much bigger
But
contributions to longevity in relationship to stopping disease than we usually give it credit for. And then when you
Or even just like band-aids. Like
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean just a fucking band-aid straight up.
yeah, it's interesting.
penicillin, yeah.
It's interesting when you go and you look at your family history. Like I was looking at my great grandfather, and like there's like all these things that they died of, like not even 100 years ago, that are like perfectly treatable today. You know, so there's lots of kind of innovations in that way. Um, I don't know. My big takeaway on RFK Jr. is I think that there's the biomedical security state is I think a real going concern. This idea of we will poison you and sell you the cure is I think the logic of a capitalist system, which I know we're not supposed to talk about, but it does seem very real to me. And in much the same way that you'll have terrorism and terrorism insurance, right? There was all sorts of discussions about terrorism and reorienting our society around terrorism. It seems like we're moving in that direction when it comes to vaccines. And for me, and I know John kind of shares this view, but like we should really just like take care of people by having everybody get genetically sequenced and everybody have like good quality, checkups and healthcare. And it's not that hard to do, all things considered. Um, but instead, we're sort of debating this AI question. And AI, of course, is like damaging for our environment. It warms the earth. It doesn't really work all that well. It misinforms people. It gets people not to think. It has all these other like knock-on anti-societal benefits, or sort of
and
drawbacks.
and it feeds right back into the cubicle corporate mentality. And it's in this area where I do believe in the idea of this a divided system in terms of the idea of not only of federal, state, and local. I think that's a really important division of power, and that old idea of the states as laboratories. They should be laboratories of excellence, really, rather than sort of fights over basic human rights and all of that. We should basically be using state governance as super colliders of best practices in
Yes.
terms of governance. And then the other thing is
Yeah,
that we need to understand.
federalism should be a raising up of standards, not a lowering of them.
Exactly, right. So like where you see that, that the California free speech protections are a little bit stronger than the federal component, so that the federal is a baseline. And then the other part of that is I believe in the in dividing sectors of the economy, but in a proper hierarchy of sovereignty, which is implied by the good side of the Declaration of Independence. The downside Declaration of Independence is the calling of all the indigenous peoples the merciless savages, and a conspiracy with King George and all of that. But the good side of the Declaration of Independence is that it's we the people are establishing this government for all of these reasons,
By the way,
right?
key
And
key
then
key key thing though there is Jefferson says that basically the king is whipping up the savages against the colonists, and then Jefferson, of course, had a view that Americans, red, white, and black, would become kind of one people over time.
So important distinction is the problem wasn't so much the savages per se. The problem was King George's weaponizing of the savages against our population. And
in
I
the
think,
conspiracy.
yes, and I think the same thing is happening once again with all the divisions within our society, which are being encouraged by the Israelis and Russians and Chinese.
That's true, but we never really quite escaped that structural component in relationship to the indigenous peoples of the United States. And I think that in looking back, that's going to be a crucial component, even in terms of thinking about like land and food, and the fact that the weaponization of food was basically goes back to the wiping out of the bison populations, that they, the high level, some of the high level American generals decided we're either going to have to kill all of the indigenous people, or we're going to have to wipe out their way of life as the quote unquote more sympathetic choice, and that's what they chose to do, was wipe out the bison. But we could restore these bison, millions of acres, and have silviculture, pasturing of food with tree crops and all of that. And the indigenous people are already beginning to lead the way on these kinds of things, the bison comment. So that's what I would just say, that there's this unhealed, unreckoned with sin that we never recovered from in terms of the framing of that conspiracy, even if it was real.
Yeah, I
And
don't think you're wrong. I mean, look, I think it was a race war, just being blunt about it. And I think what ended up happening was the Indian Act of 1924 that Coolidge signed, where he made it so that Native Americans, particularly those who'd taken up the duty of serving in World War One, could become full citizens of America. I think that was a big part of the justice there. And of course, Coolidge joined the Native American tribes as well. So he sort of tried to have some sort of justice on that. But the point I was making isn't so much about the Indians per se, important though that is. It's about the role of foreigners causing our own domestic problems to be accelerated or aggrieved or in conflict. So I think that's true of Black Lives Matter to some extent. We saw that with a lot of the Chinese money that was coming into that, or the We Build the Wall campaign. Again, lots of Chinese money coming into that with Mr. Bannon. And so there's a sort of history here of foreign governments trying to interfere in our domestic affairs by increasing our divisions, which again
yes, yeah.
gets us to the Chris Christie question, which is interesting because I think Chris Christie is raises this question about all the division within our society and who's causing it.
That was interesting, that where he talked about that, Obama sort of created some divisions, and then Trump amplified that, and we need to reverse that. That is very interesting. And before we move beyond this point that you're making of the correct part of the analysis in terms of the Declaration of Independence and the question of a foreign conspiracy utilizing domestic elements and all that. I'd like to go to that, the because I watched in French that news show that you were on, and it was interesting them, with they of course, trying to frame with the tweets with the N word and all of that. But it is interesting the point that you make about what you were actually doing and what you actually got kicked off of Twitter for, in terms of what looks like there was this foreign operation in relationship to Ferguson, Missouri. And then what's the name of the activist that you were exposing? What's his name again?
DeRay McKesson.
DeRay McKesson. And isn't it interesting? He was a crucial Aspen Institute fellow, which, by the way, that's the Crown family, which are probably the most major link to the Shine family, who were the ones who owned the Ambassador Hotel, where RFK was shot. And they also were big owners of the Jewish mob component in LA, which is where a lot of the Israeli intelligence operations were being actually connected via Menachem Begin and Mickey Meyer Cohen and Meyer Lansky. And the Shines also owned the Florida resort where Hoover, I think, was very likely compromised with the closeted lover Tolson and all of that. And so it is interesting. It turns out that you very likely were exposing this very same network in relationship to what you got kicked off of Twitter
Yeah, no, I
for.
mean, I know that that's what I was doing because I know that I had deep state friends at the time who are helping me in all these ways, all these University of Virginia and University of Delaware alums helping me both in the Jackie Coakley issue with Rolling Stone, because you'll recall Rolling Stone got sued, and then Rolling Stone's management changed, and the whole company kind of changed. And in much the same way I sued BuzzFeed to clean BuzzFeed up, and then BuzzFeed ultimately folded, certainly the news division folded. So there's these sort of secret wars that go on these publications to try to turn them or destroy them or clean them up in the ways in which libel laws and all of that comes to play. Um, Gawker immediately attacked me after I did the Michael Brown issue in Ferguson, which, I've been helping Eric on some of his writings on the Ferguson stuff. But yeah, I mean, there is an intelligence war that plays out, and my view has always been that we need to enlist the public in this fight, and that actually speaking, trying to keep all these things quiet is actually like helping the enemy in a lot of ways. Because I think, if anything, what 9/11 kind of taught me was the see something, say something ethos of Americans and the neighborhood watch and all of that. Um, that was very much alive and well within our country. That there were all kinds of people who saw things and spoke up about them, but it was the government's failure to really process all those things coming to a head. And so I think that as time goes on, we're going to get much better at these kind of questions as time goes on. But yes, what is this thing somebody just posted about?
I just did like I'm not sure what just happened, but like Joe Lombardo just got the book thrown at him. It looks like by the Nevada Ethics Commission.
Well,
I don't know. Clark County is just insane. Clark County, it's just
wasn't
nuts.
he the guy who was the sheriff when the shooting took place?
I think
I think
I think
that's
so.
right.
Yeah. Well, that speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and it's interesting related to the Saudi question in the Gulf and all of that because it seemed to
Yes, I'll
be a
tell
part
you.
of that hotel operation.
My Saudi intelligence contact reached out to me quite desperate today after the Gulf news was announced. So
So yesterday was the Israelis going nuts, and today was the
yes,
Saudis.
yes, it's interesting.
I'm actually so happy about the golf deal. I'm so happy about it. Like it won't happen, but we can seize the golf courses.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? Like, what's really going on there, right? This larger question I have with Donald Trump here is: was Donald Trump being compensated with this Gulf deal by the Saudis for sharing classified documents? Is that like the real story? That feels correct to me. I don't know if it feels that way to you, Jeremy, but
That's in my gut. It begins to look like that, especially the whole framing of this sort of real hardcore aspect of the Trump operation very much had to do with Iran and the uncloaking of the Saudi-Israeli alliance and all of that. And so it's who would be most interested in American security documents about plans on Iran? And these are probably not actually plans to do it. They're sort of, just preparing for any situation, but the Israelis and the Saudis, I would imagine. And
my
by the way, this is one thing. This is one thing that Obama did well was to try to take Iran off the table in relationship to Bibi, and but looked like he got played with Stuxnet, and then Bibi storming the Capitol in 2015. And Bibi, in his biography, his autobiography, basically just discloses that it was after he stormed the Capitol in 2015 to go against the Iran deal that all of these Middle Eastern leaders, started meeting up with him, and they actually, I think, started planning the full-on logistics for the 11/9 Trump operation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it seems to me that was exactly what happened. You know, um, my read though is that I think the Iran nuclear deal was extremely optimistic in its approach, and I think it was really kind of ahistoric. It didn't quite understand the degree to which the Israelis, particularly the Likud, need the conflict with Iran as a way to create a black market, which in turn powers up a lot of the political donors of Netanyahu, both from the casino side, right, and also from the where all the the discounted oil is sold from Iran to China, and then in turn the casino Jews are given the money, which goes to which goes to Netanyahu and to Trump and to the Republican Party generally. So I think that there's a degree of like not understanding how much how much this was an existential fight for the Likud political operation. So I think had Netanyahu been defeated and removed from power, then he could have done the Iran deal. So he
Yeah,
didn't.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't get the sequence of events correct.
No, and he didn't. And this maybe then fit into your analysis of blackmail and Obama in terms of what did Netanyahu really have over Obama that allowed, as you remember, Clinton, who's the fucking superpower here when when it was being shaken down by Netanyahu, and Netanyahu shows up the day after the Lewinsky scandal breaks out. But of course, Clinton didn't really, he was obviously compromised too, so he wasn't able to push back. So I agree with you. Obama didn't have it in him. He wasn't in an uncompromised enough position to be able to do that order correctly, which would have been to take down Netanyahu first, then go about Iran. But I'm interested in because I think your analysis of the desire for the sanction money as part of the underworld, the black economy slush funds, is crucial. So is the actual question of a hot war in relationship to Iran and the Likudists, is that all theater, do you think?
Yes,
They
I
want
think
to
it's.
maintain
I
the
think it's all
tension?
theater. Yeah, they have to maintain the tension. So they'll do assassinations, they'll do bombings, but they'll never really go into a hot war scenario. And I think the other aspect of it too is that the Israelis have an alliance with the Arab countries, who in turn take in money from the Chinese. So that's another way in which Israel is compensated through the so-called Abraham Accords.
And then my other question around Iran, and then this goes back to the history in terms of Carter and the CIA cowboys and the potential installation of Khomeini, is whether some aspect of the Israelis were part of that, or whether that is actually seen as some aspect of blowback from CIA to Israel.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what I think about that yet. I have to go back and really think and study Iran more closely, because I think most of my analysis on Iran is dated. Um, my read is that in the '92 election, Ross Perot runs, right, and Ross Perot's whole company has all these relationships with both Israel and with the Shah of Iran. So I think somehow he is blackmailed into running in '92. And he takes away just enough of the vote to make it so that Bill Clinton is elected in '92. And that's obviously a way of punishing George Herbert Walker Bush. There's apparently a program to assassinate him because he's tying Israeli money to the settlements question, which is a sort of no-go zone for the Netanyahu Israelis. And they ultimately take power there. Now, for Iran generally, my read on it is that there's lots of people that benefit from Iran staying a pariah state, not least of which are the mullahs themselves, whose hands are strengthened by the sanctions, which is, I think, the very key part of this. But I don't know if I answered your question, Jeremy.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think it's an open question in terms of specifically like Netanyahu Lakudis relationship to the 79 operation. But your general analysis makes a lot of sense. And I wonder whether like George H.W. Bush, whether his area of potential compromise in relationship to the Israelis was that time in a certain way, because it's pretty clear that he was a nemesis.
You know about the Safari Club, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of my political mentors were involved in the Safari Club. which I think is an important thing to know, just generally. And for those,
And is Brzezinski Brzezinski's part of that, right?
absolutely,
And isn't
Brzezinski.
it was interesting on the Spaces with Sachs and Elon, RFK Jr. said something about how the father of the neocons was Brzezinski. That was an interesting line.
Oh, that was interesting. I didn't pick up on that actually, but that's interesting that you picked up on that. Yeah, well, the question, of course, is what is Mark Brzezinski, right? And Mark Brzezinski is now our ambassador to Poland. Poland is now a very key part of the European Union and a key ally of ours. So there's a lot of things going on at once here that I think need to be kind of understood. But yeah, my read is basically the Biden administration is Carter's revenge. That's basically my takeaway on it.
I like that. I like that idea. I do think there was a lot of, Carter is sort of an Obama kind of figure in a certain way in terms of not having the political courage and chops to actually get done what he wanted to
I just
do.
don't think he understood how to play the game at the high levels. That would be my takeaway on Carter and Obama.
Well, this is the modern tragedy of American politics. I think is just a series of presidents who didn't quite. They're not traitors, but they didn't have what it took. A lot of them,
Well, I think
even if
events just overwhelm them at some points. And I also think that I can actually see myself, like, let's say I'm in the Reagan administration in 1980, right? We're elected in 1980, so we get in 81. So what do? They decide that the solution to the Soviet Union problem is to drive down the price of oil globally. And the way they do that is they go to every dictator on the planet that has oil, and they just encourage them to drill at any price. And then they sell them whatever they want, weapons, whatever. And that, I think, actually bankrupted the Soviet Union, if we're honest about it. And I think you can do the Carter strategy of having alternate fuel sources, alternate energy, reducing demand, whatever. And that, I think, can help you wean you off of oil. But I don't think it gets over the main problem, which is that lots of nations have oil, and lots of nations want to take out the other nations that have oil just to cause instability in it and drive up the price. So I say this before, it's like the vegetarian and the meat packer both have an interest in a high price of meat. And the same thing is true of the environmentalist and the oil man.
Yeah, I mean, like this I think it's OPEC, whatever. Saudi Arabia told OPEC that they're gonna do 500 million less gallons or something like that, going into 2024. I mean, they're just so transparent. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and by the way, I happen to like this actually. I want a higher price of oil because I think it will transition our society way faster, which I'm broadly for. So, in a weird way, I kind of like the Russian war because it drives up the price of oil. So there's all these activists in the UK that's just end oil, right? That's their message, that's their mantra. And it's kind of well, one of the ways to end oil is to make it so expensive that people can't have it.
It's weird. I've heard allegations of the Just Stop Oil people. I've heard allegations. I mean, I haven't looked into them at all, but I've heard allegations that they're funded by the oil companies themselves, and they're looking, and they're making the activists look stupid by throwing stuff on the paintings or whatever.
I'm sure there's an element of that, maybe.
It's very interesting.
Could be.
Well, we can't stop oil until we talk about stopping plastic.
That's right.
Because the vast majority of the volume of a barrel of crude oil is going to plastic. It's not going into your gas tank.
Correct.
It's going into carbon bonds that make all of modern society, pharmaceuticals, rubber, plastics,
by the way,
you name it.
find...
So until we wean ourselves off of all of the material goods in our society that are fossil fuel derived, oil's around for a while.
Yeah,
it's true. And then you add sorry.
What's the answer to that?
Bioplastics.
Green chemistry.
Yeah, better chemistry.
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, I'm just talking about. Excuse me, I've been sick, so I don't sound very well. But I mean, how do we evolve?
We invest.
Because plastic owns it.
We invest in alternatives.
We just got to invent shit. I
No,
feel like that's
Well,
no,
the
there
you
are.
know, I'm a microbiologist by training. I say we let the microbes do the work. They've been on the planet for a couple billion years longer than we have, and
Yeah.
they have a lot more
By the
metabolic
way,
potential than we have. And if
if
we
people
just,
know of startups in this space, I know that there's lots of money for them.
yeah, I mean, I bet with the right research, you could get a nice consortium of microbes that degrade PET plastic with enough, efficiency that you could actually monetize that. So
There's even studies like mushroom mycelia that can degrade oil spills and even nuclear material potentially.
The
So
problem.
there in bio sort of bioorganics, like that's where I believe the future will be, because when we're dealing with
yeah, and
plastics.
specifically, no, I was just going to say you hit the nail on the head with fungal biology. That's a really ripe area right now, especially in the sequencing space. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off
that's
there.
okay. We always forget about them. They actually appear to be one of the kingdom that's closest to us in certain ways, but they're almost like the mirror image of us, in that they really can turn death into fertile life. And it's interesting because when you then get into like silvo, pasturing and forest-based agriculture, perennial agriculture, rather than such a dependence on annual agriculture, which is really where a lot of the petroleum inputs come in, then you're talking about that the soil has a much heavier mycological component rather than a bacterial heavy component. So it begins to suggest that that is the direction that we need to go. Because then if we stop with the plastics, then we're also cleaning up this whole problem of the polluting of human bodies and the microplastics and the destruction of our endocrine systems and all of that.
Is there
Yeah.
anything medically that we can put in our bodies to do the same thing, that would clean up any of the, toxics that we have digested into our body or ingested into?
Lots of leafy green vegetables.
Okay.
Cilantro, yeah,
Oh, I do a lot of
spirulina, yeah,
cilantro. That's metal cleaning, right?
yep.
Yeah, I think if people know of startups in this space, it is something that I invest in. So I'm very interested in it. I've been looking at a number of companies, particularly one in Indiana, on this topic. So I do think we can actually solve a lot of these issues through better technology, and ultimately by taxing the plastic moguls.
I just want to give a shout out to what we've been doing in Illinois. Like it passed unanimously. Like I can't even remember exactly what it is. But it's like some sort of like board or like council, whatever, to address microplastics and stuff. Like specifically, like that's the goal, and it passed unanimously, I believe, in both chambers. And so hopefully we'll be able to get to the bottom of a lot of that stuff. I don't know. I'm really fascinated with like those like beach cleaning robots. I'm sure some people have seen like
Yeah, but
what I'm talking
efficiency
about.
is
Like
not a
just
way
what
of making money. What you want to do is you
yeah.
want to build the alternative, and then do the
Yeah.
cleanup.
That's like the Buckminster Fuller approach. And then the permaculture approach then supercharges that, because it's in permaculture design, you're always looking for what look to be waste streams, but are actually some kind of resource streams or food streams of some sort. So it's actually very important to sort of use these kinds of principles even beyond just sort of food and biology, but into in industry, and I think ultimately into politics. We're going to have to start thinking like this.
Well, you hit on fertilizer. I mean, that's a big piece of the carbon footprint right now. So there's all kinds of ways in which we could reduce our carbon footprint in the fertilizer space. One is breeding better plants that don't need as much nitrogen or phosphorus applied to the soil. And that's where genomics and genetics comes in. So there's lots of different ways you can tackle the problem. It's just a question of, Charles mentioned it, antitrust. When you have this level of consolidation in agribusiness, it's a formidable opponent. But we just need to get tougher on antitrust, and it's been a refreshing thing to see.
Yeah, John, I think maybe at some point we should do like a real project on what's available here technologically and what needs to be invested in. Because there are people that
Absolutely,
are
yeah.
part of it.
This is my jam
So if you want to do something on that, that might be something to work together on. I'm
for
probably
sure.
gonna close the space right now because I'm at a friend's house and they've invited me to their fire pit. So I have to be social. And I sort of went for a very long walk in the environs of Sugarland. But I think we'll do another one again. I think, yeah, we should talk about like the alternatives to plastics world. I think that that's very important. And then, yeah, I'm going to be talking with the Christie people tomorrow. So if you have any thoughts on what I should ask them or talk to them about, I'm going to be making the case that if Christie wants to go big, he should go genomics. The fat man being in favor of genetic sequencing, I think would be very important. So yeah, and I just leave you with this, which is that George W. Bush's nickname for Chris Christie was Big Boy, which I rather like.
Get him,
I
big
said to
boy.
a friend of mine the other day that Trump's nicknames are designed to wound, whereas whereas George W. Bush's are designed to endear. There's this sort of level of kindness, Brownie and all these other names that he had for various people. I'm not saying that George Bush was a good president, but I do think he had a sense of humor about these things.
And maybe he properly demeaned Karl Rove.
Maybe, actually. I think that Karl Rove, well, we could do a whole space on Karl Rove, who's a naughty boy.
Turd blossom. Let's be correct.
Yeah, a naughty boy. All right. Well, I wish you guys all the very best, and we'll
All
catch
right.
up tomorrow, and do stay in touch over the next day or so. Thanks so much.
Good night.
Peace.
Cheers.